The slave market on Kepler 442b reeked of desperation and broken dreams. Creatures from across the galaxy stood chained on platforms, their eyes vacant with the knowledge that freedom was a luxury they could no longer afford. The air hung thick with the bitter scent of fear and the metallic tang of restraints that had worn grooves into alien flesh. Marcus Chen stood at the edge of the crowd, his human form drawing curious glances from the various species that frequented these dark corners of the galaxy. His worn leather jacket and faded jeans marked him as someone who had seen better days, but his eyes held a sharpness that suggested depths beneath the surface. He wasn't here by choice, but necessity had a way of making strange bedfellows of conscience and survival. The auctioneer, a beetle-like vorthak with mandibles that clicked rhythmically as he spoke, gestured toward a magnificent Altarian warrior whose blue-scaled skin gleamed under the harsh artificial lights. Behold! A prime specimen from the warrior caste of Altair Prime. Trained in 17 forms of combat, fluent in 43 languages, and capable of surviving in environments that would kill lesser beings. Bidding erupted across the amphitheater. Credits flowed like water as various buyers competed for the privilege of owning such a formidable asset. Marcus watched the proceedings with a mixture of disgust and resignation. He had come here for one purpose, and it wasn't to participate in this grotesque theater of flesh and freedom. The Altarian sold for an astronomical sum to a mining consortium that specialized in hazardous extractions on dead worlds. As the warrior was led away, his dignity intact despite his circumstances, Marcus caught the brief nod the being gave him. Even in slavery, some creatures recognized kindred spirits. Hours passed as the auction continued. Exotic beauties from pleasure worlds, technical specialists from advanced civilizations, and laborers bred for specific tasks all changed hands with the casual efficiency of any commodity exchange. Marcus remained patient, knowing that what he sought would come at the end, when the crowd had thinned and the prime specimens had been claimed. The sun was setting through the dome's transparent aluminum when the auctioneer's voice took on a different tone, one tinged with distaste and barely concealed mockery. And now, esteemed buyers, we come to our final lot of the day. I must warn you that this particular item comes with significant challenges and, frankly, limited utility. A murmur rippled through the remaining crowd as the platform was wheeled forward. On it stood a creature that defied easy classification. At first glance, it appeared almost human in basic structure, but the similarities ended there. Its skin held a translucent quality that revealed the faint network of vessels beneath, pulsing with a liquid that seemed to shift between silver and gold. Forearms extended from its torso, each ending in hands that possessed 7 fingers capable of articulation that would make a master pianist weep with envy. Most striking were its eyes, which held no visible pupils but instead swirled with patterns of light that seemed to move independently of any external stimulus. This creature, the auctioneer continued with barely hidden disgust, claims to be from a species called the Etherians. It was found drifting in a damaged escape pod at the edge of the Magellan Void. No records exist of its homeworld, no database contains references to its species, and, most significantly, it has proven completely incapable of performing any meaningful labor. The crowd's interest waned visibly. In a galaxy where slavery was unfortunately common, uselessness was the ultimate sin. Buyers wanted results, whether in the form of manual labor, intellectual capability, or other specialized functions. A being that couldn't contribute was worse than worthless, it was a liability. Furthermore, the auctioneer clicked his mandibles in what Marcus had learned was the Vorthak equivalent of a sneer. This creature possesses what can only be described as a defective psychological profile. It demonstrates an alarming tendency toward what primitive species might call hope. It consistently believes that its situation will improve, that rescue will come, that freedom is possible. Such delusions make it unsuitable for any serious work environment. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Hope was indeed a defect in the slave markets. Beings who had abandoned such foolish notions were easier to control, more predictable in their despair, and, ultimately more profitable in their resignation. Marcus studied the being more carefully. Unlike the other slaves he had observed throughout the day, this one didn't carry itself with the defeated posture of the broken. Its back remained straight, its head high, and, though swirling eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail of its surroundings with an intensity that suggested active planning rather than passive observation. The creature also possesses another significant flaw, the auctioneer continued, warming to his theme of disparagement. It claims to be able to perform something it calls probability mathematics, which appears to be nothing more than elaborate guesswork dressed up in sophisticated terminology. It insists it can predict outcomes, calculate odds, and determine optimal solutions to complex problems. However, every attempt to verify these claims has resulted in answers that, while mathematically sound, are essentially useless in practical applications. More laughter from the crowd. The galaxy was full of species that claimed special abilities, and most buyers had learned to be skeptical of such assertions. Mathematics was one thing, but practical application was what mattered in the harsh realities of galactic commerce. The bidding, such as it was, started at a mere 100 credits. The first bid came from a Corellian junk dealer who specialized in buying damaged goods for spare parts. When no immediate counterbid materialized, he shifted uncomfortably, perhaps wondering if even that modest sum was too much for such an obvious liability. Marcus watched as the seconds ticked by. The auctioneer's voice took on the rapid-fire quality of someone eager to conclude an embarrassing transaction. 100 credits, going once, going twice. 5,000 credits. The voice that cut through the air belonged to Marcus, and its calm confidence created a moment of stunned silence that seemed to stretch across the amphitheater like a physical force. Every head turned toward him, expressions ranging from surprise to suspicion to outright confusion. The auctioneer's mandibles stopped clicking entirely. Excuse me, did you say 5,000 credits? For this particular lot? Marcus stepped forward, his worn boots echoing in the sudden quiet. That's correct. 5,000 credits for the Etherean. The being on the platform turned those swirling eyes toward Marcus for the first time, and he felt a strange sensation, as if something vast and intelligent was taking his measure with instruments far more sophisticated than ordinary sight. A hot trader near the front of the crowd wheezed out a question that seemed to voice what everyone was thinking. Human, are you perhaps suffering from some form of mental deterioration? This creature is demonstrably worthless. Its previous owners have documented its complete inability to perform basic tasks. Marcus smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several nearby beings step back involuntarily. Perhaps they weren't asking it to perform the right tasks. The auctioneer, still struggling to process this unexpected turn of events, managed to stammer out the traditional verification. Are there any higher bids? 5,000 credits is the current offer. Silence stretched across the amphitheater. No one was willing to pay even a fraction of that amount for what they considered damaged goods. The Corellian junk dealer was staring at Marcus as if he had announced his intention to purchase a black hole for use as a paperweight. Going once, going twice, sold to the human for 5,000 credits. The transaction completed with surprising speed, as if the auctioneer was eager to conclude this anomaly before someone came to their senses. Credits changed hands, ownership documents were processed, and, within minutes, Marcus found himself walking through the market's exit corridors with his purchase following behind him. The Etherean moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy several laws of physics. Its forearms swayed in a complex rhythm that somehow never resulted in collision or interference, and those seven-fingered hands gestured occasionally in patterns that suggested ongoing calculation or perhaps communication with some unseen intelligence. You realize, the being said in a voice that sounded like wind chimes made of crystal and starlight, that you have just made what most would consider a catastrophically poor investment. Marcus glanced back at his companion. Most people aren't very good at recognizing value when it doesn't come in familiar packages. And, you believe I possess value that others have missed? I believe, Marcus said as they emerged into the orange twilight of Kepler 442b's evening, that a species capable of developing probability mathematics sophisticated enough to be dismissed as elaborate guesswork by people who don't understand it might have other capabilities that have been similarly overlooked. The Etherean's response was a sound that might have been laughter if laughter could be translated into pure mathematics and, then, back into audible form. You are either remarkably perceptive or catastrophically optimistic. In my experience, Marcus replied, leading them toward the spaceport where his ship waited, those two things are often the same thing wearing different clothes. Behind them, the slave market continued its ancient business, unaware that it had just witnessed the beginning of something that would reshape the balance of power across known space. The being that no one wanted was about to prove that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the wisdom to look beyond surface appearances. As they walked through the gathering darkness, neither Marcus nor his companion could have predicted that within 6 months, every major power in the galaxy would be desperately seeking to acquire the services of the Etherian, or that the word hope would transform from a defect into the most valuable commodity in known space. But that is often how the most significant changes begin, not with grand proclamations or massive displays of force, but with a single individual choosing to see potential where others see only problems, and having the courage to act on that vision even when the entire universe suggests they are making a mistake. The first step toward proving that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others is learning to recognize strength in forms that weakness cannot comprehend. Marcus Chen's ship, the Wandering Star, was a testament to the principle that functionality mattered more than aesthetics. The modified Corellian freighter had seen better decades, but its fusion drive hummed with the steady reliability of machinery that had been lovingly maintained despite its age. Scorch marks from various encounters decorated the hull like badges of honor, and the interior showed the wear patterns of someone who lived his life between the stars. The Etherian, who had introduced itself simply as Zeph, moved through the ship's corridors with the same fluid grace it had displayed in the market. Those 4 arms never seemed to be idle. They traced patterns in the air that Marcus was beginning to suspect were far more than nervous gestures. "Your vessel," Zeph observed as they settled into the ship's modest common area, "has been modified extensively. The power distribution patterns suggest capabilities far beyond standard freight transport." Marcus activated the automatic departure sequence, feeling the familiar vibration as the ship's systems came online. "You can tell all that just by walking through the corridors?" Probability mathematics includes the analysis of design efficiency and energy flow patterns. Your ship's modifications suggest someone who understands that true capability is often hidden beneath unremarkable exteriors. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. "Speaking of hidden capabilities, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what you can actually do." Zeph's 4 arms moved in what Marcus was learning to recognize as a gesture of contemplation. Honesty is a luxury that slaves rarely experience. Are you prepared for answers that might complicate your assumptions about reality? Try me. The Etherian's swirling eyes seemed to focus inward for a moment before meeting Marcus's gaze. "My species evolved on a world where cause and effect operated according to quantum mechanical principles that most civilizations encounter only in laboratory conditions. We developed the ability to perceive probability streams, the mathematical frameworks that underlie what other species call fate or luck or chance." Marcus leaned forward, his interest genuine. "Perceive how?" "Imagine you are standing at a river's edge, watching the water flow. Now imagine that instead of water, you are watching the flow of potential futures, each current representing a different sequence of choices and their consequences. This is how I experience reality. Every moment contains thousands of potential outcomes, each with its own probability coefficient." The ship shuddered slightly as it cleared the planet's atmosphere, and Marcus felt the familiar relief of leaving another world behind. "That sounds like it would be overwhelming." "It would be, if not for what your auctioneer correctly identified as my greatest flaw." Zeph's crystalline voice carried something that might have been amusement. "Hope is not an emotion for my kind. It is a mathematical function. The ability to identify probability streams that lead to positive outcomes and to calculate the precise actions necessary to nudge reality toward those streams." Marcus processed this information while running a final check on their navigation systems. "So when you told your previous owners you could perform probability mathematics?" "I was offering them the ability to influence chance itself. To make the unlikely likely, to turn impossible odds into favorable ones, to transform random chaos into ordered success." "And they didn't understand the value of that?" Zeph's 4 arms moved in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as the Etherian equivalent of a shrug. "They asked me to predict when their mining equipment would break down. I told them how to arrange their maintenance schedules to ensure optimal performance and maximum equipment lifespan. They called it useless because I couldn't give them a simple date and time." Marcus laughed, the sound harsh in the ship's recycled air. "They were looking for fortune-telling, not engineering optimization." "Exactly. They wanted magic, not mathematics. When I offered them the tools to reshape probability in their favor, they dismissed it because it required effort and understanding rather than passive consumption of predictions. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the ship's communications array. Marcus frowned at the display, noting an incoming transmission from a source that should have been several days behind them. Wandering Star, this is the Vorthack enforcement vessel creditors due. You are ordered to heave to for inspection and cargo verification. Marcus exchanged glances with Zeph, whose swirling eyes had suddenly taken on a pattern of rapid, intense activity. I don't suppose your probability mathematics have any suggestions about our current situation? Fascinating. Zeph's forearms began moving in increasingly complex patterns. There is a 73.7% probability that this is not routine enforcement. Someone has discovered that you paid significantly above market value for supposedly worthless cargo and has concluded that you possess information they lack. The transmission crackled again, more insistent this time. Wandering Star, respond immediately or we will treat your non-compliance as an act of piracy. Marcus's hands moved to the ship's control systems with the fluid efficiency of long practice. What are our options? Standard evasion has a 12% probability of success. The enforcement vessel's acceleration profile suggests military-grade engines. However, Zeph's voice trailed off as those seven-fingered hands traced ever more intricate patterns in the air. However, what? The enforcement vessel's course and timing reveal something interesting. They are not simply pursuing us, they are attempting to intercept us at specific coordinate points. This suggests they know our destination. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. How could they know our destination when I haven't filed a flight plan? Because, Zeph said with the calm certainty of mathematical proof, someone has been monitoring your activities for some time. This purchase was not an opportunity, it was a test. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. A test of what? Of whether you would recognize value that others had dismissed. Of whether you possessed the courage to act on unconventional assessments. Of whether you were the type of individual who could appreciate capabilities that transcend normal understanding. Before Marcus could respond, the ship's proximity alarms screamed to life. 3 more vessels had just dropped out of hyperspace in a perfect intercept formation, cutting off every available escape route with mathematical precision. Wandering Star, came a new voice, this one carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. This is Admiral Cross of the Syndicate Fleet. You will surrender your cargo immediately, or you will be destroyed. Marcus recognized the name. Admiral Cross commanded one of the galaxy's most powerful criminal organizations, a syndicate that specialized in acquiring assets that governments and corporations couldn't legally obtain. The fact that he was personally involved suggested that this went far beyond a simple slave recovery operation. Zeph, Marcus said quietly, his hands already moving to implement emergency protocols, I need to know right now, is there any possibility of getting out of this intact? The Etherean's response came without hesitation, those swirling eyes now moving in patterns so rapid they seemed to strobe. There is one probability stream that results in survival and success, but it requires actions that will seem completely irrational to conventional thinking. Tell me. You must surrender. Marcus stared at his companion. That's your mathematical solution? Give up? No. Zeph's forearms moved in a complex gesture that somehow conveyed absolute certainty. Surrender is the only action that leads to the optimal outcome. But surrender and defeat are not synonymous, and sometimes the greatest victories require the temporary appearance of complete failure. The ship shuddered as the syndicate vessels closed in, their weapons systems clearly charging for a demonstration of their seriousness. Marcus found himself faced with a choice that would define not only his immediate survival but the trajectory of everything that would follow. He looked at the being he had purchased less than 6 hours ago, this creature that the galaxy had dismissed as worthless and defective. In those swirling eyes, he saw something that transcended hope or fear. He saw the absolute certainty of someone who had calculated every variable and arrived at an answer that conventional wisdom would never accept. All right, Marcus said, reaching for the communications controls.
I hope you know what you're doing.
Hope, Zeph replied with that crystalline voice that seemed to contain echoes of distant mathematics, is not required when you can calculate certainty. Marcus opened the communication channel, knowing that whatever happened next would either vindicate his faith in unconventional wisdom or result in both their deaths.
Admiral Cross, this is Marcus Chen aboard the Wandering Star.
I'm prepared to discuss terms. There are no terms, came the cold reply.
Surrender your cargo or be destroyed.
I surrender. The silence that followed those words seemed to stretch across light years. Then, with the grinding inevitability of a trap closing, the syndicate vessels moved in to claim their prize, unaware that they were about to discover why the most dangerous opponents are often those who appear to have already lost. In the cargo hold, secured systems that had been dormant for years began an activation sequence that would not become apparent until much later. And, in the common area, Zeph continued those complex gestures with 4 arms, making minute adjustments to probability streams with the precision of a master craftsman shaping reality itself. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, but sometimes the destruction of weakness requires the temporary appearance of ultimate vulnerability. Sometimes the strongest position is the one that looks like complete defeat, and sometimes the greatest victories begin with unconditional surrender. The syndicate was about to learn that there is a vast difference between capturing prey and understanding what you have caught, and that difference would reshape the balance of power across the galaxy in ways that no conventional strategist could have anticipated. As the Wandering Star was tractored aboard the massive syndicate dreadnought, neither Marcus nor Admiral Cross could have predicted that this moment of apparent defeat was actually the first move in a game whose rules transcended everything they thought they understood about power, strategy, and the true nature of strength.
The dreadnought's cargo bay engulfed the Wandering Star like a predator consuming its prey.
Admiral Cross's flagship, the Iron Dominion, represented the pinnacle of syndicate engineering, a vessel capable of reducing planets to ash and sophisticated enough to extract value from the resulting devastation. Its corridors hummed with the efficiency of an organization that had perfected the art of acquisition through superior firepower.
Marcus and Zeph were escorted through these corridors by guards whose cybernetic enhancements gleamed under the harsh lighting.
The Ethereans' 4 arms moved in subtle patterns that Marcus was beginning to realize constituted a form of ongoing calculation, as if Zeph was continuously updating probability assessments based on new environmental data. Admiral Cross waited for them in a chamber that served as both office and interrogation room. The man himself was a study in controlled menace, tall, lean, with silver hair that spoke to decades of survival in a profession where most practitioners died young. Scars traced geometric patterns across his visible skin, each one a reminder of encounters that had shaped his approach to conflict resolution. Marcus Chen, the Admiral said without preamble, gesturing for them to take seats that were positioned to reinforce the power dynamic of the situation. Former military intelligence, dishonorably discharged for refusing to participate in what you termed ethically compromised operations. Since then, a trader operating in the gray markets of the Outer Rim, notable primarily for an unusual ability to identify value in overlooked opportunities. Marcus settled into the offered chair with the casual confidence of someone who had been interrogated by experts before.
You've done your homework.
I make it a policy to understand the psychology of those who interest me. And you, Mr. Chen, have done something very interesting indeed. Cross's attention shifted to Zeph, and Marcus noticed the Admiral's pupils dilate slightly as he took in the Etherean's unusual features. You paid 5,000 credits for a slave that had been valued at less than 100 by every previous assessor.
Sometimes the market gets things wrong.
Indeed. The question is whether you recognized something that others missed, or whether you are simply prone to expensive mistakes.
Cross activated a holographic display that showed detailed scans of Zeph's physiology.
My science teams have been studying this creature's species for some time. Zeph spoke for the first time since their capture, that crystalline voice carrying undertones that seemed to resonate with the ship's metal bulkheads.
How long, specifically?
The directness of the question seemed to surprise Cross. 2 years. Ever since we detected an anomaly in the Magellan Void that suggested the presence of technology operating on principles we didn't recognize.
And, in those 2 years, Zeph continued with mathematical precision, how many useful applications have you discovered for Etherean capabilities?
Cross's expression hardened.
None. Every test has yielded results that are either meaningless or impossible to replicate.
Because, Marcus interjected, beginning to understand the deeper currents of this conversation, you've been trying to use Etherean abilities like conventional technology. You want to point them at problems and get predictable results.
Exactly. Zeph's forearms moved in what Marcus now recognized as a gesture of confirmation.
Your scientists approach probability mathematics the same way they approach conventional physics. They seek to control variables and produce repeatable outcomes. But probability mathematics is not about controlling chance, it is about cooperating with it. Admiral Cross leaned forward, his interest clearly engaged despite his skepticism.
Explain.
Every moment contains infinite potential outcomes. Most beings experience only one of these outcomes, the one that conventional physics determines to be most probable. My species learned to perceive the mathematical relationships between these potential outcomes and to influence which possibilities become reality.
That sounds like mystical nonsense dressed up in scientific terminology. Zeph's swirling eyes took on patterns that seemed to pulse with internal light.
Your fleet consists of 17 vessels arrayed in a formation designed to prevent escape while maintaining optimal firing solutions. Your science teams have been analyzing my DNA for genetic markers that might explain my abilities. Your intelligence operatives are currently attempting to decode Mr. Chen's personal files to determine why he sought me out specifically. Cross's face remained impassive, but Marcus noticed the slight tension around his eyes that suggested the Etherean's observations were uncomfortably accurate. Furthermore, Zeph continued, you are planning to transfer both Mr. Chen and myself to your research facility on Proxima Station within the next 18 hours. You believe that controlled laboratory conditions will allow you to extract useful information through methods that are more persuasive than conversation. The Admiral's hand moved slightly toward the weapon at his side, a gesture so subtle it might have been unconscious.
Lucky guessing.
No, Zeph said with the calm certainty of mathematical proof. Probability calculation based on observable variables and behavioral pattern analysis.
Would you like me to predict what will happen next?
Cross's voice carried a dangerous edge.
Enlighten me.
In approximately 4 minutes and 17 seconds, your fleet will receive a priority distress signal from the mining station at Kepler 186c. The signal will report that their primary fusion reactor is experiencing cascade failures that threaten to destroy the entire facility along with its population of 12,000 workers. Marcus watched the Admiral's expression shift from skepticism toward something approaching alarm. Kepler 186c housed one of the syndicate's most profitable mining operations, and the loss of the facility would represent a catastrophic financial blow. You will be forced to choose, Zeph continued, between maintaining your current position to interrogate us or responding to save an asset worth billions of credits and thousands of lives.
That's impossible.
There are no known issues with the Kepler 186c reactor. There are no known issues because the cascade failure will be triggered by a solar flare from Kepler 186 that your astronomers have not yet detected. The flare will interact with the station's magnetic shielding in a way that creates harmonic resonance in the reactor's containment field. The silence in the chamber grew thick with tension. Marcus found himself holding his breath, not because he doubted Zeph's calculations but because he was beginning to understand the true scope of what his companion was capable of. The communication alert came exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds later. Admiral, came the urgent voice of the communications officer, priority distress signal from Kepler 186c. They're reporting critical reactor failures and requesting immediate assistance. Cross stared at Zeph for a long moment, his expression cycling through disbelief, calculation, and something approaching awe.
How? Probability mathematics.
I perceived the solar flare's approach and calculated the probability cascade that would result from its interaction with the station's systems. The distress signal was not a prediction, it was a certainty based on observable data that your instruments had not yet processed.
Marcus felt a chill of understanding. You didn't just predict the reactor failure.
You calculated when it would happen and told us about it at precisely the right moment to demonstrate your capabilities.
Correct. Sometimes the most convincing proof is the one that arrives exactly when it is needed most. Admiral Cross was facing the same choice that had confronted Marcus at the slave market, whether to recognize value in something that transcended conventional understanding. The difference was that Cross had billions of credits and thousands of lives at stake, while Marcus had risked only his faith in unconventional wisdom. "Admiral," came another urgent transmission, "the reactor situation is deteriorating rapidly. We need to respond immediately if we're going to prevent a complete containment failure." Cross made his decision with the speed of someone accustomed to operating under pressure. "Set course for Kepler 186c, maximum speed. And prepare a communication link to their engineering teams." He turned back to Zeph with an expression that had shifted from skepticism to intense interest. "Can you help them stabilize the reactor?" "The reactor cannot be stabilized using conventional methods. However, if your engineers are willing to implement a modified containment protocol that appears to violate several laws of physics, I can guide them through a procedure that will not only prevent the cascade failure but improve the reactor's efficiency by 37%. "In exchange for what?" Zeph's forearms moved in patterns that somehow conveyed both complexity and simplicity simultaneously. "Nothing. This is not a negotiation, it is a demonstration. You have spent 2 years trying to understand Etherian capabilities through force and analysis. I am offering you the opportunity to experience those capabilities through cooperation and mutual benefit." The next several hours transformed the Iron Dominion into something unprecedented, a syndicate vessel operating not through domination but through collaboration. Zeph guided the engineering teams through modifications that seemed impossible but produced results that spoke for themselves. The reactor not only stabilized but began operating with an efficiency that exceeded theoretical maximums. Marcus watched the transformation with fascination. Cross's crew, initially skeptical and hostile, gradually shifted toward something approaching reverence as they witnessed technology that had baffled them for months suddenly performing beyond their wildest expectations. "This is just the beginning," Zeph explained during a brief pause in the technical consultations. "Probability mathematics can be applied to any system where multiple variables interact to produce outcomes. Navigation, weapons efficiency, resource extraction, even tactical planning can all benefit from the ability to perceive and influence probability streams." Admiral Cross, who had spent his career acquiring power through superior firepower and ruthless strategy, found himself contemplating possibilities that transcended everything he had previously understood about advantage and capability. "What do you want?" he asked finally, the question carrying the weight of someone who recognized that the conventional rules of engagement had suddenly become irrelevant. "Freedom," Marcus answered before Zeph could respond. "Not just for us, but for everyone who has been dismissed, overlooked, or undervalued because they don't fit conventional definitions of utility." Zeph's crystalline voice added harmonics that seemed to resonate with hope itself. "The universe is full of beings whose greatest capabilities are hidden beneath surface appearances that suggest weakness or uselessness. Your slave markets are populated by individuals whose potential has never been properly assessed because the assessors lack the tools to recognize unconventional forms of value." The implications were staggering. A galaxy where the discarded and dismissed could be recognized for their true potential, where value was measured not by conventional metrics but by the infinite possibilities that probability mathematics could reveal. Admiral Cross, a man who had built an empire on the exploitation of conventional power structures, found himself facing a choice that would define not only his future but the trajectory of civilization itself. He could attempt to capture and control these capabilities, following the same patterns that had failed for 2 years, or he could embrace a new paradigm based on cooperation and mutual benefit. "The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others," he said finally, the words carrying the weight of someone who had just undergone a fundamental transformation of understanding. Marcus smiled, recognizing the truth that had guided his decision at the slave market. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is recognize that true strength comes not from dominating others but from helping them discover their own hidden capabilities. 6 months later, the galaxy would discover that the most valuable commodity was not weapons or resources or territory, but the ability to see potential where others saw only problems. The slave markets would transform into centers of capability assessment, where the dismissed and overlooked could be recognized for their true value.
And, at the center of this transformation would be the beings that no one had wanted, a human who had learned to recognize value beyond conventional metrics, and an Etherian whose mathematical perception of probability had revealed that hope was not a defect but the most powerful force in the universe. The weak self that sees only surface appearances and conventional definitions of value had been destroyed, replaced by a strength that recognized infinite possibility in every moment and every being. And, against such strength, no conventional force could prevail, because it operated according to rules that transcended everything the universe had previously understood about power itself.